Oklahoma Newsroom. This is an OSU update. I'm Jenny Carlson here with Kyle Fredrickson. It's Baylor week, 6:30 on Saturday night in Stillwater. And of course, after Baylor last year, it's hard not to reflect back to what that game meant for the Cowboys. That was the first start for one Mason Rudolph. He comes out of Redshirt very late in the season in that game at Baylor, Kyle. And obviously it wasn't a victory for Oklahoma State. Baylor really good last year, obviously. But it really kind of set the stage for positive momentum, the win in Bedlam, the win in the bowl, and now we've seen, this team not lose a game since then. Begs the question, the redshirt year, late, he only got 3 games out of that. Why the timing? I mean, obviously there was an injury to Dax Garman, but why not sooner? And is there any regret that they pulled the redshirt year at all?
Well, it's a good question because as I'm sure you remember and as fans remember, when that decision was made, there was a lot of questioning about it. OSU had just lost 5 games in a row in pretty terrible fashion on their part. So you figure you throw in a true freshman who's really the future of your program with that offensive line and how they've been playing. It caused a lot of controversy. None of that exists today, obviously. Baylor is now the last team that Mason Rudolph has yet to defeat. He's really run the table since he's taken over as a starter after that game. But you're right. Because of his instant success, it raised the question, why didn't this guy get brought out sooner? Gundy even joked that his kids even were asking him about it in the days after that decision. Right, like everybody else. But, in talking with Mike Yurcich and Mike Gundy this week, it was pretty clear they just felt the guy wasn't ready. Part of that was just based on the number of snaps he had received. When you're talking about that second-string quarterback, when you got a new starter in Dax Garman, you got to get Garman as many snaps as he can get to be prepared, especially being that he was just taken over and he, had that rough offensive line. You got to get him as much practice as possible. So he didn't really have the reps. He wasn't a guy who necessarily wowed to that level in practice. But, when it came down to make the decision, Mike Gundy said the conversation lasted about 30 seconds. He asked Mason if he wanted to play. He said yes, and they forged ahead. Now, how much of that story is being left out in talking with reporters, who knows? But, like I mentioned before, the Cowboys are happy to have their guy.
Well, and you mentioned, him maybe not being ready to play, but that offensive line, I think that had to be part of the equation because, Dax Garman was getting hit, he was getting knocked down, he was getting rattled. You could see it really affecting both his physical and his mental game. I have to think there was concern if Rudolph's not ready himself, and then you put him behind an offensive line that was struggling. It almost seemed like that could be a recipe for not only disaster then, but more long term. Well,
absolutely, in Dax Garman's case, the guy had a rocket arm, but his pocket presence was pretty rough, and that kind of combined into this issue of having that offensive line. That being said, one of the reasons that Rudolph, I think, succeeded late in the year was his ability to avoid the rush, to extend the play, something Garman couldn't really do. Even then, you don't really want a true freshman quarterback playing behind that unit. Now, really, with the addition of Victor Salako and a couple of returning starters, most of that unit is back, but at least now they have a little bit more experience. And there's no doubt that Gundy and company feels a lot more comfortable having Rudolph back there than they would have just a year ago.
Seems like that offensive line got better late in the year last year, but they might have gotten better because they had a better guy.
Right, no doubt.
All right, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.